Andy here. Today, we are going to talk about retirement planning. Now, we'll break down some financial planning basics, including things like the 4% rule, sequence of return risk, and explore how these relate to our current economic climate. Plus, we'll discuss retirement distribution planning, so you know exactly how much you need to feel safe in retirement, knowing that you're covered and have enough. Chapter 1, the Trinity study and the 4% rule. Imagine you've been saving for years in a retirement fund, and now it's time to start using all that money because you stopped working. Now, the Trinity study analyzed a variety of different methods and strategies for withdrawing money from retirement accounts, to put it mildly. And they found that 4% is kind of the magic number that you need to be able to withdraw from a portfolio safely to last for a 30-year retirement. In the study, they actually had a 50% stock, 50% bond portfolio as the basis for that. So we can talk about some pros and cons around that. And so interestingly, this study, the Trinity study, became really the basis for this new thing called the 4% rule, which has really been the standard ever since for what retirement planners and financial advisors and everybody else uses as a rule of thumb when calculating how much money is needed in retirement. So again, the 4% rule literally means that you can take 4% of your overall nest egg each and every year. And basically, we know that they account for inflation, they account for, an average rate of return over these kind of up and down market cycles, over 10, 20, 30 years, and bake into inflation into that number to make sure that 4% is the number you can take safely and live on for a long period of time. And again, noting that this is a mix of stocks and bonds to kind of help smooth the ride, to give you income as needed, to minimize risks while maximizing growth potential. So let's say you saved $1 million for retirement. To make an easy example, to determine how much you can use every year, we'll do the following calculation. You take the annual withdrawal. So the annual withdrawal equals the total savings, in this case $1 million, times the withdrawal rate, in this case 0.04. So $1 million times 0.04 equals $40,000. So in this example, the person with $1 million can retire on $40,000 a year. To find the monthly amount, we just divide that annual amount of $40,000 divided by 12, and you'll see we get $3,333 per month. So to recap, with $1 million, you can retire with $40,000 a year or $3,333 per month. So if you want to calculate this for yourself, let's say you need $3,000 a month, you would just take 3,000 times 12 to get 36,000 a year, and then divide by 0.04, and you'll see you get $900,000. And that's what you need to generate this income every year. So there's definitely some pros and cons right off the bat, right? The pro is, hey, this is a simple framework and a simple guideline to know how much you need in retirement. However, it doesn't really account for years of high inflation or, lower return years, lower yields on the bond market, etc., in a perfect way. One pro is we've got a lot of track record of data, several decades of which to pull from to say that there's a pretty good likelihood that you'll be okay. The con is that, as they say, past performance is not an indicator of future performance, which means that, the returns of the past won't necessarily be an indicator for the returns of the future, like no crystal ball. A pro is that it helps in budgeting and kind of the long-term planning of thinking this stuff through, giving you a target to shoot for. But again, the con is it's not super adaptable to individual circumstances based on, an unknown, forever changing economy. Now, even though the 4% rule is a great baseline for retirement planning, let's talk about what does it look like in today's economy. First, the study was done in 1995, and therefore all the data is from 1995 and earlier. So we're currently in kind of a weird interest rate environment where they shot up very quickly over the last couple of years, were previously low. So it's a little bit of an unknown scenario that we're finding ourselves in right now as regards to the interest rate environment. At the time of this recording, I checked this morning and it looks like the Fed is likely to cut rates for the first time in a while. Also, market volatility can really play a big role, and that leads us to a sequence of return risk, which we'll talk about later on, so stay tuned for that. Also, the original Trinity study was only for a 30-year period. When we consider things like longevity risk, which we'll get into, or people wanting to retire early, that changes things a little bit. So considering all the things we've discussed, a lot of people would say that maybe it's better to plan for the 3.5% rule instead. However, it is important to note, many people that go way deeper on this topic that I'm going to do in this video will talk about that there's so many scenarios where doing 4% over longer periods of time, that the market can be a runaway train in the best way possible, and you could have more money than you ever know what to do with if you're just taking 4%. So I want to give a pretty even-keeled assessment of this and not say that I'm recommending 4% or 5% or 3.5%. I'm just trying to give you a broad overview of this concept. When planning for retirement, it's not just the numbers game. There's also plenty of other considerations, such as your health, lifestyle choices, economic climate, etc. That's why we need to talk more retirement distribution planning. Now, what is retirement distribution planning and how can you use it to ensure that you don't run out of money too early? Chapter 2, Retirement Distribution Planning. Retirement distribution planning is about creating a strategy to withdraw these funds from your retirement accounts so that you know that your savings are going to last as long as you need them to. This means considering factors such as lifespan, healthcare costs, lifestyle needs, and investment returns. A thoughtful plan would consider, the need for short-term income now, as well as the desire for long-term financial security. You can easily balance these when you consider something called sequence of return risk. Sounds like fancy and confusing, but stick with me, it'll make sense. So sequence of return risk means really just the timing of which you pull money out of your retirement account based on what the market is doing can be either really great or really terrible. So imagine you started your retirement journey and now you're planning to pull money out of your savings. If the market performs poorly as you're stepping into retirement and you can experience several years of negative returns, that could absolutely sink your battleship and erode your retirement nest egg very quickly. I'm talking you could be going back to work as a Walmart greeter at 92 if you're not careful. However, if you start in retirement and the market has a few good years as you enter retirement, that's a different story. So to give an example for the sequence of return risk, let's use that $1 million we talked about earlier and say you plan to pull out 40,000 of that or 4%. And then in year one, the market drops by 10%. So your $1 million is now worth 900,000. After you take out that 40 grand, now you've got 860,000 remaining. Year two, it drops again, another 10% decrease, which erodes your savings further before you take out another withdrawal. Maybe in year 3 and 4, the market improves, growing by 5%, but you're still playing catch up from those early losses. And I'm sure you can see how that could very quickly erode your retirement nest egg. To reduce the impact of sequence of return risk, there's a variety of things we can do to tackle this. 1, diversifying your portfolio. So equities are great, S&P 500 and chill, nothing wrong with that. However, downshifting into bonds as you near retirement is one strategy, I'm not saying the best, one strategy to help mitigate all of your money being in a volatile stock market environment. Pulling out money to put it in cash, maybe even 5 years before you retire, is another consideration. So the concept, not putting all of your eggs in one basket, right? If one basket falls, in this case stocks, you have other baskets to rely on, whether it's cash or bonds or even real estate, things like that. 2 is you can consider annuities as a part of your plan. So an annuity is basically taking a chunk of money, giving it to an insurance company, and them giving you a paycheck for the rest of your life. One quick riff on annuities is annuities are based on mortality tables. So the older you are, the more income you're going to be generating. They basically look at it similar to a 4% rule, but oftentimes you can get guaranteed 5%. My dad is 77 years old as an example, and he's going to get a 10% safe withdrawal rate based on the money he's putting in his annuity. So it can be a great deal for the right scenarios, for the right planning situations, for the right people, etc. Number 3 is a dynamic withdrawal strategy. So instead of just taking a 4% every year, no matter what happens, you can shift your strategy based on what the market is doing. So there are people in the early retirement or the FIRE movement, which I love this concept, where they will literally go overseas where the dollar is worth more. And maybe, we're going to live a year in Thailand while the market's down so that they take out less from their investment portfolio. That's a great way to turn lemons into lemonade, in my opinion. Now, this might sound strange, but living longer might actually be an unexpected problem instead of the blessing that it usually appears to be. That, my friends, is called longevity risk. Chapter 3, longevity risk. What is longevity risk? So literally, longevity risk is the risk that you might outlive your money. Not fun. Like, imagine planning a road trip and not having enough gas to get to your destination. So in financial terms, living longer means you need more money to keep living. People are living longer than ever, and so this is becoming an increasingly growing concern. So it requires financial plans to consider these potentially additional years, which, guess what, typically means people need to save more. And you're like, why does this matter? So without proper planning, you might run out of money during your golden years, which will mean having to cut back significantly on your lifestyle or moving in with family, relying on others, maybe not your first choice. So here's some strategies to help avoid or mitigate longevity risk. So the concept of like longevity insurance would be an annuity, like we touched on earlier. Annuity, again, is a guaranteed stream of money that will last as long as you do. Now, again, we are not going to have to go into all the annuity stuff right now. There are good annuities. There's some that are maybe a little fee heavy. So again, I sold annuities for a large insurance company for several years. So I'm sharper than most on the concept, but there are some that are good. There are some that are not great. There's some that are very, very specialized for specific scenarios. So I'm not going to paint with a broad brush here. But again, like my father, in the right case, it made perfect sense for his situation. Another way to mitigate risk is delaying your Social Security. So every year you delay your Social Security, you're going to get an increased payout. So if you wait until 70, that's the max that you can delay Social Security, assuming it's still around at the time that we retire. But the longer you delay, the more money you're going to receive for the rest of your life. Option 3 is planning out your healthcare costs. So whether that's just saving in a health savings account at HSA and making sure that you're maxing that out now, it could be having healthier lifestyle choices, making sure that you're not going to be dependent for some of these preventable diseases. So like lifestyle choices, diet, et cetera, making sure that you're moving your body, all of those fun things. And obviously socking as much money away as you can, not only in these qualified retirement accounts, but again, the HSAs and things like that, so that you have money for healthcare costs that are going to eventually happen. So let's consider this hypothetical scenario, right? We've got another example, $1 million, a need of $40,000 annually. Year 1, you're doing normal withdrawals. Years 1 through 10, you're doing normal withdrawals, and maybe you purchase it, an annuity to act as that kind of longevity insurance like we talked about. Years 11 through 20, perhaps delaying Social Security benefits like we talked about. And then thankfully in years 21 plus, perhaps, we look at, there's a lot of data that suggests that people retire and need less money in the later years of retirement just because they're not, 60 and like traveling to Italy all the time or, gallivanting around Europe, right? So you're going to do less activities the older you are typically, which require less money. And there are ways that you can perhaps get like Medicare, Medicaid, things like that as you age as well, depending on what your insurance you can afford. So to wrap, here are some highlights from what we talked about today. The 4% rule allows you to pull out 4% of your retirement portfolio, but given market volatility, interest rate risk, all these other things, 3.5% might be a more conservative outlook, or perhaps for the first 5 to 10 years of retirement. Retirement distribution allows you to have multiple ways to plan out how you break down your nest egg, shielding you from things like sequence of return risk. Longevity risk means that you can outlive your savings. That's why considering something like delaying Social Security, having an annuity, things like that, even a pension if you have it, can help mitigate these risks. Now, you might be wondering, how do I invest to ensure a wealthy future for you and your family? Well, I've got a video linked above about the ideal order of operations for high income earners. So check that out. Lastly, if you want to apply to work together one-on-one, there'll be a link down below in the description. And if you're sub $100,000 in income, there's also a link to a do-it-yourself course that I've created to help you implement my automatic money flow system. Thanks for watching.